When the morning light filters through the curtains and strikes the face of an old grandfather clock, its steady tick becomes more than a measure of passing minutes. It becomes a companion, a reminder of every moment that stretches between one heartache and the next. For many older Americans, that sound is all they have, the rhythmic echo of time itself in a house that once rang with laughter. According to recent surveys, nearly 1 in 4 adults over the age of 65 report experiencing chronic loneliness, and in households where the eldest member lives alone, that figure climbs even higher. The silence settles in like dust on old furniture, inescapable, forgotten, and yet impossible to ignore. Imagine Eleanor, a widow living in a stately Victorian home in Savannah. On the outside, the oak trees rustle with Spanish moss, and the cobblestone streets hum with the chatter of tourists. But inside, the only noise is the tick-tock of her grandfather clock. Each chime marks not the arrival of a visitor or the laughter of grandchildren, but the weight of empty rooms. Her children live far away, one in Austin, another in Chicago, and though they send birthday cards and the occasional holiday greeting, 6 months can pass without a single phone call. Eleanor's world has shrunk to the size of that living room, where dust motes drift in the sunlight and memories swirl like pollen in the summer air. Loneliness in later life is not just a sentimental concept. It takes a measurable toll on both body and mind. Studies have shown that seniors who identify as lonely face a 29% higher risk of heart disease and stroke. They are more likely to suffer from depression, cognitive decline, and weakened immune systems. The effects are cumulative. A day without conversation becomes a week, a month, then a year. Soon the days blur into one another, as indistinct as the dust motes in Eleanor's parlour. It's no wonder that she sometimes stays in her floral print armchair all morning, watching the light move across the walls, longing for even a passing word. In many communities, this reality goes unspoken. Families assume that busy careers or long distances excuse them from regular check-ins. Mum's fine, they tell themselves. She's always been independent. Yet that independence can mask a deeper pain. When the social calendar shrinks to occasional grocery trips where the cashier's polite, "Did you find everything?" rings hollow. The reminder stings that there is no one waiting at home. The echo of, "I'm not interested," to a telemarketer becomes yet another dismissal, another confirmation that no voice on the other end truly cares. It doesn't take tragedy for loneliness to set its anchor. It can begin the day a spouse passes away, or the moment the grown children pile into their cars and drive off to new lives. For Eleanor, it began first with her husband's funeral, then with the empty bedrooms of her children, and finally with the corridor of a household that felt purpose-built for those no longer present. Every unused door and silent hallway is a monument to what once was. And yet even as her heart grows heavier, a deeper truth emerges. This silence is alive. It pulses through the floorboards, floats in the chandeliers, and clings to the wallpaper of a life that has raced ahead without her. What many families fail to realize is that occasional visits, however loving, are not enough. A birthday card arrives in the mail, the neat handwriting across the envelope promising affection, but there are no voices, no stories shared over coffee, no warm hugs that linger beyond the fleeting moment of arrival and departure. Technology can help video chats and messaging apps bridge thousands of miles in an instant, but they cannot replace the simple comfort of a human voice. A weekly coffee chat over FaceTime is a start, but it too can become perfunctory if it starts to feel like just another item on a to-do list. The real antidote to loneliness is consistency and intimacy. Scheduling a phone call every Tuesday at 10 a.m. may seem small, but for someone like Eleanor, it transforms a hollow routine into a lifeline. The voice at the other end brings news of a grandchild's first steps, reminds her of an inside joke from 30 years ago, or simply pauses in companionship as two people share a moment of silence together. Those weekly check-ins become rituals of belonging signals that someone out there remembers and cares. Of course, families still make mistakes. They lean on the assumption that an older relative has their own interests or gets out enough. They fall into the trap of thinking that because someone can dress themselves and pay the bills, they must be thriving. Yet even the most self-sufficient senior can feel hollowed out by isolation. The absence of social contact is not a problem to be fixed once a month, but a persistent reality that needs daily attention. And it need not be an onerous burden. It can be as simple as a text at lunchtime, thinking of you, or a shared playlist of songs they loved together decades ago. For seniors, the illusion of solitude sometimes feels safer than the risk of rejection. They may hesitate to ask for calls, not wanting to burden their children. They might downplay their grief, insisting they're fine, even as the rooms echo with memories. But family members must learn to look past those polite reassurances. Consistent effort reaching out, listening and empathizing breaks through the armor of self-restraint and brings genuine connection. As the sun sets and the first evening shadows gather in Eleanor's home, she no longer sits alone in silence. Her phone buzzes promptly at 10 a.m. every Tuesday, and this week is no exception. She listens as her daughter reads a poem she wrote in college, and her son describes a new client at his law firm. They laugh over a forgotten family recipe, and for a moment, the walls of that old house seem to breathe with life once more. The grandfather clock continues its steady cadence, but now each tick marks a heartbeat shared across time and distance. Loneliness may be the silent guest that no one invites, but it need not be the only presence in a senior's life. With thoughtful, consistent outreach, weekly calls, surprise messages, or even jointly watching a TV show via streaming families, can transform that oppressive quiet into a resonance of love. The remedy is not grand gestures, but small, reliable acts of caring woven into the fabric of everyday life. Next, we'll explore how these simple connections can become powerful tools for protecting an older loved one's well-being and ensuring their rights and assets remain secure. Imagine Mary Thompson, a spry 78-year-old grandmother living in suburban Ohio, who had always taken pride in managing her own affairs. She lived alone in the home she and her late husband bought in the 1970s, tending her rose garden every spring and volunteering at the local library every Tuesday. Yet when her only son, David, announced that he and his sister Allison thought it best for her to simplify by selling the house and moving into a retirement community, Mary felt something shift deep in her chest. She loved her children dearly, but their suggestion came with an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. Statistical talk about maintenance costs, veiled references to her declining abilities, and the promise that she'd be safer under full-time care. Too often, well-intentioned families slide into a pattern of combined financial logic and emotional reasoning, reminiscent of the way David and Allison approached Mary. In David's phone calls, he'd cite rising property taxes in Ohio, the unpredictable furnace repairs on a 50-year-old home, and research showing that seniors who live alone are more likely to fall and go days without help. Across town, Allison would send a text describing her own sleepless nights, worrying that Mum might forget to take her evening medication, and coyly remind Mary how much easier it would be if all her care needs were under one roof. This two-pronged approach, first the numbers, then the heartstrings, can feel insurmountable to a parent trying to do the right thing. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, nearly 1/3 of reported financial abuse cases involve family members. When the argument is packaged as concern and practicality, An older adult's defenses can erode before they even realize the extent of what is being asked. But how do you distinguish genuine concern from coercive pressure? The first step is recognizing the warning signs. Overwhelming use of expert data. It's one thing for a son to say, "I read that furnace replacements can cost up to $8,000, and another to flood you with brochures, city tax assessments, and a lender's pitch for a reverse mortgage. The former is information sharing. The latter is a concerted push, guilt, and obligation tactics. "We just want what's best for you" can quickly shift into "we worry about you when you don't do what we recommend." If expressions of love are tied to compliance, "if you truly cared, you'd move closer to us." That's emotional leverage, rapid-fire decisions. When the conversation escalates from "would you consider downsizing" to "here's the contract sign by Friday," you're no longer in a deliberative process. You're being cornered. Isolation from outside advice. Family members who discourage you from talking to friends, other relatives, or independent professionals are trying to cut off your support network. Mary noticed these patterns slowly at first. At a Sunday brunch, Alison slid a stack of glossy retirement community pamphlets across the table, announcing brightly that the clubhouse had a heated pool and an activities director who planned exciting excursions. When Mary hesitated, David leaned in and said, "Mum, you know how hard it is for us to visit you in Ohio. If you were in Columbus, amazing, we could drop by any afternoon." What felt like an innocent suggestion was quickly becoming a squeeze. Move or deprive us of time with you. Once you recognize these tactics, it's crucial to arm yourself with legal tools. Advanced directives and power of attorney (POA). An advance directive, often called a living, will let you specify your wishes for medical care if you become incapacitated. A durable power of attorney designates someone you trust to manage your finances if you can't. Having these documents in place drafted with an independent attorney means you make the decisions on who guides your care and assets rather than ceding control under pressure. Guardianship versus conservatorship. In some states, a family member can petition the court to become your guardian, making personal decisions on your behalf, or conservator handling your finances. These processes demand medical evaluations and court assessments. If a family member tries to rush you through these steps without proper medical certifications, it may be a red flag of undue influence. It's your right to insist on a neutral medical evaluation and legal representation. Consulting an elder law attorney. Elder law specialists understand the nuances of Social Security Medicaid eligibility and protecting your assets from inappropriate transfers. An independent attorney can translate complex legal language and guard against documents that disproportionately favor one child over another. Armed with knowledge, Mary decided to call a trusted friend, Carol, her neighbor for 40 years and a part-time paralegal. Over iced tea on her shaded porch, she read Carol the text from Alison. "Our community has 24/7 staff health screenings and bingo nights. You'd love it." Carol listened carefully, then helped Mary draft a polite but firm response. "Thank you for your concern. I'm exploring options, but will not be making any decisions until I've spoken with my attorney and my financial advisor." Too many seniors fall prey to common mistakes at this stage. Signing papers without review. A stack of forms at the dining table can be deceptively presented as housekeeping. Without allowing time for review, ideally 48 to 72 hours, you risk forfeiting rights you can't recover. Acting alone. Feeling embarrassed or wanting to avoid conflict, you may try to go it alone. Instead, involve a trusted friend or professional. A second pair of eyes may spot a clause that requires you to sell the home within 6 months, something you never intended. Underestimating reverse mortgages. Those tempting cash-out offers can come with hidden costs. Fees, insurance premiums, and compounding interest can erode your equity faster than you realize. Consider all alternatives such as a home equity line of credit or downsizing on your own terms, delaying until it's too late. Courts look at your mental capacity when deciding on guardianship petitions. If you wait until a crisis like a fall or hospitalization, you may lose your chance to appoint who you trust. Early planning protects your autonomy. From her porch, Mary felt the tension ease. She was no longer cornered at the brunch table or bombarded with glossy brochures. Instead, she had a plan she would meet the elder law attorney recommended by Carol the following week, invite her financial planner to review her accounts, and call her daughter's godmother someone impartial before making any commitment. But the journey doesn't end with recognizing and resisting undue influence. It's about reclaiming your voice. Set clear boundaries. Let family know the channels you prefer, weekly phone calls, monthly visits, and gently decline any attempt to discuss your living arrangements outside of those times. Document conversations. Keep a brief journal of dates, who you spoke with, and what was discussed. If your family later claims you forced the move, you'll have a record showing your consistent stance. Stay engaged. Loneliness can make you vulnerable to pressure. Maintain your routines. Volunteering gardening book clubs, and let your family see your independence in action. Mary discovered that by combining warmth with firm boundaries, she could reshape the conversation. When Alison next called, Mary said, "I appreciate how much you care. I've scheduled an appointment with Attorney Ramirez, and I'll share her recommendations with both of you. Let's talk again after that." Suddenly, the dynamic shifted. Alison's tone turned from insistence to curiosity. "That sounds reasonable, Mum. We're here to support you." Families often think asking tough questions is unkind. In truth, caring for an elder involves balancing respect for their autonomy with a genuine desire for their well-being. It's not about steamrolling decisions, but offering options and then stepping back. When son or daughter becomes advisor rather than dictator, trust can flourish. In the next section, we'll explore how senior citizens like Mary can proactively defend their rights. Assemble the right team of professionals and transform legal empowerment into everyday peace of mind. Mary sat at her kitchen table early one crisp morning, the spring light filtering through her lace curtains. In front of her lay 3 neatly labeled folders: medical records, financial statements, and contacts and documents. For the first time since her children began urging her to move, she felt a growing sense of purpose rather than fear. She was no longer simply resisting their pressure. She was taking control of her future. Her first step was to affirm her rights. Mary reached for the booklet she had picked up from the Ohio Senior Law Project, Your Rights as a Senior. Flipping through the pages, she highlighted passages about the right to refuse unwanted care and the right to manage one's own assets. She read the section on involuntary guardianship, underlining the requirement in Ohio law for a court-ordered medical evaluation and a hearing before any guardian or conservator could be appointed. Having that knowledge gave her a kind of armor. She understood that her autonomy was protected by statute, not just by her own stubborn will. Next, Mary called Attorney Ramirez, the elder law specialist recommended by her neighbor Carol. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," she said firmly. Within a few days, they met in Ramirez's sunlit office, its walls lined with books on elder rights and Medicaid planning. Ramirez explained the practical differences between various legal tools. Durable Power of Attorney (POA) appoints a trusted agent to manage finances if Mary became incapable but revocable at any time she chose. Advance Healthcare Directive documents. Her wishes for medical care, naming an agent who must follow her instructions. Revocable Living Trust. Places assets into a trust that she controls, ensuring a smoother transition if she ever needed assistance and protecting assets from court conservatorship. Mary decided to draft a durable power of attorney, naming Carol as her agent for financial matters and attorney Ramirez as her healthcare agent. She left the office feeling lighter, clutching copies of the signed and notarized documents. They would be stored in her bank's safe deposit box with a certified copy held by her physician and another by her longtime friend, Pastor Jenkins. This distribution meant that no single family member could unilaterally change the plan or claim authority over her affairs. Back home, Mary turned her attention to assembling the right support network. She signed up for the local chapter of the Aging Life Care Association, a group of certified care managers who provide unbiased advice on senior services. One call connected her to Ellen, a care manager who offered to review her needs every 6 months and recommend vetted home care agencies if she ever needed help. Mary also noted the phone number for the state long-term care ombudsman, a free service that advocates for residents of nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Even though she had no plans to move into one, having that resource on speed dial gave her reassurance. To safeguard her finances, Mary invited her financial planner George for tea. Over Earl Grey and shortbread, they examined her investment portfolio, her CDs, and her Social Security statements. George suggested setting up automatic bill payments through her credit union's online portal, reducing the risk of missed payments or predatory phone calls. He also recommended placing a modest emergency fund in a high-yield savings account for unanticipated expenses. HVAC servicing car repairs, or even legal fees if her family insisted on challenging her decisions. Having a clear written budget and a designated emergency fund meant that Mary could respond calmly rather than feel panicked by a sudden door-to-door reverse mortgage salesman. With legal protections in place and a professional network assembled, Mary tackled the less tangible but equally vital resource emotional support and community connection. She began attending a weekly Elder Voices discussion group at her library, where seniors talked about everything from grandchildren to gardening techniques. There she met Frank, a retired school principal, who introduced her to the local master gardeners. Together, they replanted her rose garden, replacing the old bushes with disease-resistant varieties. Each morning, Mary walked out to her front porch, inhaling the fragrance of new blossoms and exchanging greetings with neighbors who had once been strangers. Those brief conversations about the weather, a passing squirrel, or the latest bestseller stirred a sense of belonging she had not realized she craved. Over the next few weeks, Mary methodically recorded her progress in a senior empowerment journal. She tracked calls with her attorney, meetings with her planner, and notes from the ombudsman. On days when loneliness crept back in, she reread entries, reminding her how far she had come from confusion and pressure to clarity and confidence. When David called to ask again about the retirement community, she replied, "I appreciate your concern. I have a plan for my care and my finances, and I will involve you when I'm ready. For now, let's talk about your week. How's your new project at work?" By shifting the conversation away from her living arrangements and toward shared interests, Mary reclaimed her role as the mother, not merely the subject of discussion. Her tone remained warm but assertive, demonstrating that while she valued her children's input, the decisions were hers to make. Slowly, they learned to respect her boundaries. Calls about grandchildren, shared recipes, and family law replaced the earlier negotiations about property values or memory tests. One afternoon, Mary met with Ellen, her aging life care consultant, to review her emergency plan. They updated her contact list to include a neighbor able to check in on her on short notice, and they confirmed that her Medicare and supplemental coverage were up to date. Ellen explained the differences between Medicare Advantage plans and Medigap policies, helping Mary choose the best option for her medication needs. With that finalized, Mary realized that her independence was not a fragile state at the mercy of her children's schedules. It was a robust system of legal documents, professional allies, and community ties. In defending her rights, Mary discovered a profound truth. Preparation breeds peace of mind. No longer did she wake at night, wondering if a single phone call from Allison would upend her life. She understood that her home and her life were not liabilities to be liquidated, but assets to be stewarded according to her values. When her daughter visited for a long weekend, they spent Saturday planting perennials in the garden and Sunday baking apple pie from Mary's recipe book. The sharp edge of past tensions had softened into a gentle understanding. Mary's choices were rooted in both practicality and love. By the end of the month, Mary's kitchen table no longer bore the weight of uncertainty. Instead of brochures and last-minute contracts, it held a single folder labeled My Plan, containing copies of her POA Advanced Directive Budget Summary, emergency contacts, and a list of her favorite songs for her just-in-case playlist. It was a map of her autonomy, charting every resource she could draw upon, should life ever throw her another curveball. Key to this transformation was recognizing that empowerment is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. Every 6 months, Mary and Ellen review her arrangements. Every year, she updates her directives and budget to reflect changing needs. And whenever a new question arises, should I replace the roof? Or will a medical alert system help? She consults her team of professionals and makes an informed choice. In this way, Mary turned the threat of losing her autonomy into an opportunity to reinforce it. She learned that rights are only as strong as the steps we take to protect them, and that resources, legal, financial, social, must be actively assembled and maintained. More than just resisting her children's pressure, Mary created a life fortified by knowledge, support, and community. Next, we'll explore how Mary built a renewed sense of purpose and belonging through creative reinvention, transforming challenges into opportunities for growth and joy. Mary woke early again, but this time it wasn't to organize legal documents or meet with an advisor. Instead, she rose with a gentle excitement pulsing through her chest, as if the sun itself had whispered a promise of possibility. The little bungalow she now called home sat at the end of a winding lane lined with maple trees, their leaves painted in the gold and amber of late summer. In the window boxes, the black-eyed Susans she'd planted in spring nodded their cheery faces toward the dawn. Over the past few months, Mary had rebuilt not just her paperwork and her support network, but her very sense of purpose. Tending her own life, she realized, was as nourishing as watering a garden. She began each morning with a cup of chamomile tea on her front porch notebook in hand, sketching out ideas for how she might contribute to this new community that had welcomed her so warmly. It was Sharon, her neighbor, with the riot of red curls, who sparked the first seed of an idea. "You have a gift," Mary Sharon had said one afternoon as they pruned lavender in the shared garden bed behind the bungalow. "Your jam at the library bake sale was the first to sell out. Why not turn that into something more like a stall at the farmer's market?" Mary laughed at the thought of herself amid the bustle of early morning vendors. But the idea took root. She loved her rosehip preserves and her heirloom tomato jam recipes passed down from her mother. She treasured the way each spoonful captured the warmth of summer sun or the tang of autumn apples. Why not share that warmth more regularly? Over the next week, Mary did her research. She visited the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, notebook in hand, observing vendors of honey homemade soap, baked breads, and vibrant bouquets. She chatted with the market manager, a kindly woman named Teresa, who explained the process: a modest annual fee, a small paperwork packet for health and safety, and a stall assignment near the entrance prime real estate for a newcomer. Mary returned home and drafted a simple business plan on her kitchen table, a document she labeled with the same clear handwriting she used for her empowerment journal. She listed startup costs, jars, labels, booth rental projected sales based on 50 jars sold at $8 each, and a timeline for production. She set aside part of her emergency fund, just enough to cover the first 3 months of expenses, leaving a cushion for the unexpected. Next, she called Frank, the retired principal, who'd helped her with her porch repair. "Frank," she said, "I think I'm ready to open a stall at the market. I need a little booth built sturdy but charming. Can you help me design something that fits my rose and jam theme?" Within days, Frank arrived with a stack of reclaimed wood and a toolbox in hand. Together they sketched a simple booth frame with a slatted back for hanging small chalkboard signs, Mary's Blossom Preserves in looping script, and Taste Summer in a jar below it. Sharon contributed by painting a wooden sign with cheerful daisies and mounting it above the frame. They lined a folding table with a lace cloth and homage to Mary's grandmother, and arranged mason jars filled with jam like brightly coloured jewels. As the first market day approached, Mary spent evenings stirring simmering fruit with brown sugar and singed vanilla beans, filling each jar by hand and carefully sealing the lids. The scent of bubbling strawberries filled her kitchen, drawing in the neighborhood's curious cats and the occasional morning walk-by neighbor seeking to sample a spoonful. Mary smiled at each tasting, noting which flavors drew the most compliments: elderberry apple spicy pear, and that rosehip preserve that seemed to conjure fragrant memories of home gardens past. On opening day, Mary arrived at dawn, her booth bearing the soft glow of hand-strung fairy lights and a small chalkboard listing her flavors. She greeted early customers with a warm good morning and offered tiny scoops of jam on crackers. Mothers pushing strollers paused, delighting in the unexpected floral notes of rosehip, while college students eyed the elderberry apple with curiosity before nodding approvingly. By mid-morning, Mary was nearly sold out. She exchanged recipes with a baker who promised to top her morning muffins with Mary's raspberry-lavender combo. She swapped gardening tips with a man who grew exotic mushrooms nearby. Each sale was more than a transaction. It was a conversation, a shared moment that made her feel both useful and alive. Of course, there were bumps in the road. Mary soon learned that market life required more than stirring jam. She had underestimated the cost of liability insurance and the annual permit fee for her county. On one particularly cold morning, she forgot to bring her notebook of change, and a flurry of small bills and coins spilled onto the gravel walk. Neighbors, vendors, and customers alike rushed to help her gather the money, turning a potential humiliation into a moment of genuine camaraderie. She also discovered the importance of marketing a plain booth could be easily overlooked. So she added a small vase of wildflowers and printed simple business cards featuring her age-smiling portrait by Sharon. She began an email list typed carefully in her journal, and later transferred online with Sharon's help so she could notify regulars when she'd offer seasonal jams like fig ginger or apple cinnamon in the fall. By the end of the summer season, Mary had more than doubled her initial projections. She'd built a reputation not just as a jam maker, but as a beloved community member. The market manager offered her a permanent booth spot with a slight discount, and local shops began requesting wholesale orders. Mary found herself fielding calls from a small cafe downtown, asking if she could supply preserves for their weekend brunch. Through it all, Mary held to a few guiding principles, lessons learned through her earlier struggles. Balance ambition with boundaries. She capped her production at what she could comfortably handle, refusing to overextend into late nights that would leave her too tired to enjoy her morning tea. Cultivate community, not just customers. She set aside a small jar of each weekly batch as a thank you gift for the retirement home across the street, brightening the residents' dining room tables and forging a new friendship with the activities director. Adapt and learn. She took a weekend workshop at the local extension office on food safety labeling and allowed herself to ask questions that once felt embarrassing, proving that growth never has an age limit. Celebrate small wins. Small wins. Every sold-out jar, every nod of approval, every spontaneous hug from a neighbor was a reminder that her efforts resonated and that joy could be found in the simplest of pleasures. As autumn painted the neighborhood in rust and gold, Mary reflected on how far she'd come. She no longer defined herself solely by the loss and betrayal she'd endured. Instead, she saw a woman who had transformed her solitude into service, her love of flavor into a flourishing venture, and her careful planning into the groundwork for lasting fulfillment. One crisp October morning, Mary sat behind her booth, carving mini pumpkin designs into the jam jars and handing out samples of her spiced pear preserves. A young couple approached their child, tugging at their sleeve. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the carved pumpkins, and she pressed her face against the booth's lace tablecloth. "May I try that, please?" she asked in a small voice. "Of course, sweetheart," Mary said, dipping a cracker into the jar. The child tasted it, then beamed. "It's like fall in my mouth." Mary's heart swelled. Fall in her mouth. What a perfect way to describe the alchemy of fruit and spice. The morning sun lit the painted maple leaves overhead, and Mary realized that she too was like those flavors. A blend of seasons, experiences, and memories come together to create something unexpectedly wonderful. Packing up later that day, Mary tucked a small leftover jar of pear preserves into her car for the weekend. She drove home down the leafy lane, humming a tune she hadn't sung in years, her grandmother's lullaby. Back in her cozy kitchen, she washed and set aside her jam pots, then poured herself a cup of apple cider tea. As she sat by the window, steam curling toward the ceiling, she thought about the next season to come: cranberry ginger for winter, perhaps, and rhubarb rose in early spring. Her life had become a tapestry woven from fresh starts and persistent care. She had taken the wisdom of her past, her mother's recipes, the lessons of resilience, the power of community, and stitched them into a new pattern that felt both familiar and thrillingly new. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the first stars appeared in the clear autumn sky, Mary smiled. She had found her purpose again, not in legal documents or emergency plans, but in the sweet, tangible joy of creation and connection. And in doing so, she discovered that the hardest chapters can blossom into the richest harvests, if only we dare to plant new seeds. Next, we will explore how Mary's journey led her to embrace forgiveness and the lasting strength of genuine community bonds. Even as the last leaves of autumn drifted from the maple trees, Mary felt an unexpected lightness settle in her chest. The season of harvest had yielded more than jars of preserves. It had cultivated friendships, renewed purpose, and most importantly, a heart open to forgiveness. One crisp morning, Mary received a letter hand-delivered by Teresa, the farmer's market manager. It wasn't another wholesale inquiry or a permit renewal. It was from David. His handwriting looked tentative, as though he practiced each letter before putting pen to paper. "Dear Mum, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I realize now how I pressured you to move without considering what you wanted. I'm sorry for treating your home as an investment instead of a treasure. I'd like to visit Asheville over the holidays if you'd have me. Love, David." Mary folded the note carefully and tucked it into her journal. She felt her stomach tighten, a swirl of old hurt and wary hope. She remembered the icy way he had called her from the senior residence, the clinched ceiling panic when he revealed their plan. And yet now, with those memories softened by time and perspective, she sensed something genuine in his words. She decided to reply. Sitting at her kitchen table, Mary wrote slowly, "Dear David, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your apology and would be glad to have you visit. Asheville is beautiful in winter, and I'd love to show you my home, my garden, and my new life. Let's plan for the week before Christmas. With love, Mum." With the response sealed, Mary felt a cautious warmth. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't erasing the past, but releasing its grip on her heart. It was an act of strength, not weakness. Over the next few weeks, Mary prepared for David's arrival. She planted winter pansies in her window boxes to brighten the grey days. She baked spiced pear preserves and packaged them in tiny jars tied with ribbons. She invited Sharon over to help decorate the living room with strings of pine cones and rosemary sprigs. The scent of greenery mingled with her simmering kettle as gentle laughter filled the rooms. When David finally stepped off the Greyhound bus, his cheeks pink from the cold, Mary wrapped him in a hug that surprised them both. He carried a small gift bag inside a framed photo of them years ago on her rose garden steps. "I found this cleaning out my desk," he said softly. "I thought you might like it." They spent the first day in quiet companionship. Mary guiding him through the bungalow, pointing out the new rose garden she'd planted as a spring test patch, and showing him her My Plan folder, now updated with winter checklists and emergency contacts. David listened, nodding as though seeing his mother's independence and security for the first time. That evening, Mary cooked a simple dinner of roasted root vegetables and herb-crusted chicken. Over plates of food steaming in the firelight, David apologized again for the way he and Allison had handled things. "I was scared," he admitted, "scared of losing you, but I forgot to listen." Mary reached across the table to touch his hand. "We both learned something," she said. "I learned to speak up, and you learned to listen." The words felt like a bridge spanning the years of misunderstanding. Forgiveness had unlocked something deeper, the possibility of rebuilding their relationship on new, healthier ground. Over the next few days, Mary guided David through small moments of participation, showing him how to stir a fresh batch of tomato jam, teaching him the precise angle for cutting wax paper to wrap a delicate jar. Together, they delivered jars to the neighbors at the retirement home across the street, where smiles and gratitude welcomed them like old friends. As they walked back, David asked, "Do you mind if we swing by that senior center we talked about? I'd like to volunteer if that's okay." Mary beamed. "I'd love that. They could use an extra hand at bingo night." On that snowy Thursday, side by side, they served snacks and called out numbers to a rowdy group of seniors. Mary watched David beam as an elderly gentleman high-fived him for winning a prize. In that moment, the past hurt felt distant. They were simply mother and son, joined in a shared purpose. When David prepared to leave, his cheeks flushed with emotion, Mary hugged him fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "For coming home?" He lingered at the door, uncertain. "Mum, can we do this again? Not just holidays. Maybe a quarterly market day together." Tears pricked Mary's eyes. "I'd like that," she said, "and I promise to keep inviting you." After David's departure, the bungalow felt quieter but not lonely. Mary settled into her usual routines, watering her winter pansies, stirring sweet apple butter on the stove and tending to her journal. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Sharon arrived with a cup of cocoa and a gentle smile. "I saw your son off," Sharon said softly. "He looked different." Mary nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "He is. I think he finally sees me. Really sees me." Sharon sat beside her on the couch. "You know what's remarkable? You made space for his apology, even though you didn't have to. That's a gift." Mary sipped her cocoa, thinking back over the months of transformation. She recognized that forgiveness had not been a single moment, but a journey from anger and betrayal to understanding and compassion. It had required her to feel the pain fully and then choose to let it go. In the weeks that followed, Mary's life continued to blossom in unexpected ways. The retirement home began inviting her to lead a monthly jam-making workshop. She found joy in teaching a group of eager seniors how to balance pectin and sugar, listening to their shared stories of summer canning and harvest festivals. The workshops became so popular that the community centre asked her to expand into cooking classes, first soups and preserves, then holiday baking. Mary discovered that sharing her knowledge fed her soul as much as her body. Through it all, Mary never lost sight of the lessons she'd learned about boundaries and self-care. She declined invitations that would overextend her, choosing rest over obligation. She spent mornings writing letters to other senior pen pals as part of a local Golden Pens Club, trading stories with elders in distant states. She took weekly walks with a group of neighbors along the river trail, reveling in the crisp air and the camaraderie of shared conversation. Most importantly, Mary embraced the idea that genuine community could function like a tapestry, each thread representing a different relationship, a different season of support. David became one vibrant thread, Sharon and Frank others, the seniors at the retirement home still more. Together they formed a network resilient enough to weather any storm. One evening, as Mary prepared for bed, she paused before the mirror in the hallway. Her hair was flecked with silver, her hands lined with age, but her eyes held a spark that had been missing for too long. She thought of Arthur of Elias and Cora of the years when her life had felt like a house emptied by absence. And she realized she had built something more precious than any home. She had built a life defined not by walls or possessions, but by the connections she'd nurtured and the forgiveness she'd extended. Lying in bed that night, Mary opened her journal and wrote, "Tonight, I am grateful for the power of forgiveness. I am grateful for the friends who lifted me, for the son who learned to listen, and for the chance to share my gifts with others. My life is richer not because it's free of pain, but because I chose to transform that pain into something good." As she closed the journal, she felt a gentle peace settle around her. In the stillness, she understood that forgiveness and community were not endpoints, but ongoing practices, seeds to tend gardens, to cultivate friendships, to honor. And so, in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Mary drifted to sleep, confident that tomorrow would bring new opportunities for connection, new moments of joy, and the continued blossoming of a life reclaimed by love.